So hello everyone and welcome to the 20th episode of Join Us at the Table. My name is Camille Vanny and I'm a senior here at Santa Clara and I work at the Center for Food and Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
And hi, everyone. My name is Bologna. I'm a first year here at Santa Clara. I'm a business major working at the Center for Food and Entrepreneurship. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to talk to Miss Katie.
And today I'd love to introduce you guys to Katie Cantrell. She's the Director of Corporate Outreach for the Better Food Foundation, an organization that supports dietary change initiatives to build a more healthy, equitable, environmentally sustainable, and kinder food system. Katie has been a leader for food policy workshops with universities, government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies for over a decade and is now spearheading the Greener by Default initiative that works to implement plant-based defaults in corporate food service. Before joining the Better Food Foundation, Katie was the executive director for the founder of the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition and graduated from UC Berkeley in 2009 with a degree in psychology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Katie.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So we can just jump right in for questions. Before we get started, we would love it if you could tell us a little bit about when your passion for sustainable food practices came to be, and sort of what that development into your career looked like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I became interested in the food system from the perspective of animal welfare. So I had always been an animal lover growing up. And then when I went to college at UC Berkeley, I joined the Berkeley Organization for Animal Advocacy. And it was there that I learned about factory farming, which is the industrialized system that produces 99% of the meat in the United States. And I learned that that is really the largest source of animal suffering in the world. And so that got me interested in the food system and working to change it. And then as I learned more about factory farming, I realized that it's not just an animal welfare issue, but also a sustainability issue, a human health issue, a social justice issue. And it's really, food is at the crux of so many of the most pressing issues facing us today. And so that's what motivated me to really focus on it as my passion. It started just as I assumed that I would do this just as a volunteer in my spare time. I didn't expect to be able to do this advocacy as my full-time job. And then I started an organization kind of in my spare time. I did that for about 4 years while I worked a day job at an elementary school. And then eventually it picked up enough momentum. We were able to get donations and I was able to do that as my full-time job. And that kind of launched me into this career and into this space.
That's awesome. It's so nice to hear that you sort of just pursued your passion and turned that into a job. I think a lot of us oftentimes think that we have to sort of separate our passions and our jobs, but it's so great that you were able to find a way to combine the both. So that's really inspiring. So thank you for that. And so moving into the Better Food Foundation, we'd love to know why Better Food Foundation. How exactly did you get involved with the Better Food Foundation, and what are some of the most exciting initiatives you've been a part of?
Yeah, so I, as Kimmy mentioned in my bio, so I ran a different nonprofit for about 10 years, and it was really gratifying work, but also it's pretty, can be pretty exhausting to run a nonprofit. It's just very demanding. There's a lot of different things that you have to do. And so I didn't really have much time anymore for doing the actual programmatic work. It's a lot of time managing other people and fundraising and those sorts of things, which, they're satisfying, but there's nothing to me quite as satisfying as actually going out into the field and talking with people and making change directly. And so I felt myself starting to get burned out, and I wanted to do work that was kind of more directly engaging in programming. And I really liked the approach that the Better Food Foundation was taking to policy change. So they had a program called Default Veg, and I was really drawn to that idea that the work that I had been doing for a decade was educating people about the impacts of the food system and trying to change their minds in order to change their behaviors. And so this idea was really powerful, especially I was a psych major in college, realizing that actually you can change people's behavior in order to change their minds. So we can change people's food choices without even talking about the problems with factory farming and all of that. It's a very heavy topic. And so doing this work with corporations and institutions to change their food policies that then shapes the way thousands of people eat was really appealing to me. And so that's why I transitioned into it. And I had seen from the work that I was doing with FFAC, I would give talks like to corporate green teams, and I had seen that there was a lot of interest and need for policy changes that corporations could implement that were really simple, that would help them serve more sustainable food.
Awesome. I'm so glad you brought up the Greener by Default initiative because that was definitely something that, while poking around the website, I thought was most interesting. Um, and I also noticed that Greener by Default and the Better Food Foundation have these two separate websites as well as like social media platforms, um, and things like that. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the distinction between these two organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bit confusing. It's something we're working internally to figure out like what is the best positioning. So the Better Food Foundation is sort of an umbrella. They're almost like an incubator, really, for a bunch of different programs and also some other separate nonprofits. They really just try to encourage and help make connections. And so one of their main programs had been Default Veg, which is this idea of like, rather than having meat be the default, people have to specially opt in to veg options just to make veg the default, give people a choice to opt into meat. Um, and when I started doing the work for a corporate audience, I realized that having veg in the name, like calling it default veg, was off-putting to a lot of people because it sounds kind of radical. It sounds like you're trying to make everyone vegan. And so we realized that it would actually be better received if it had different branding. And so we created the Greener by Default name and made a separate website that's really targeted for that specific audience. The Better Food Foundation does a number of different programs for a number of different audiences. And so it's really about just that like targeted messaging and knowing your audience and what's most relevant to them and what will most appeal to them. And that's what led to that separation.
Yeah, and I think that's really important in the work of advocacy is just like recognizing what works and what doesn't. It's kind of like that flexibility of like, even though you want to send a message a certain way, like noticing that like, okay, this isn't working for my audience. How can we change this? But still in the end, get the same message across. So I really appreciate that, especially as a marketing major. I really, it's nice to see that in practice.
Yeah.
Um, so moving on, we noticed that you participate in many different symposiums and conferences, the most recent being Berkeley's Plant Future Symposium. Is this a typical part of your role as a director of corporate outreach? And what does your daily life look like in this role?
It is. I mean, I think it's not as directly related to my job. So my main focus is getting corporations to implement a plant-based default, like for their, if they do catered events, if they have a cafeteria, if they have a coffee bar, making like an oat milk default when they're serving coffee to employees. That's the main focus. And so for that, I do a lot of networking and just reaching out to contacts at different companies, speaking to corporate green teams, connecting with dining directors and sustainability directors. So that's my primary focus. But because connections and networking is such a huge part of that, it really helps for me to get the message out there and meet more people by participating in all these different conferences and symposia. And then also just as someone who's passionate about this issue, I'm always trying to, get the message out there and also to share my own experiences too, in case it, helps someone or inspires someone else.
Yeah, I noticed on your guys' Instagram, that Blue Bottle Coffee actually implemented, is it oat milk as their new default? That's so cool. I thought that was awesome. And
Yeah.
definitely made me think a little bit too about like just the like in coffee shop culture. Like I feel like at least for me personally, most of my friends are always ordering oat milk anyway. So why not just make that the default for everyone? It tastes, I think, even better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so also now that we know a little bit more about the context of your role as the director of corporate outreach, what do you typically like look for in a partner?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly a company that is really like forward thinking, that has a sustainability initiative, like whether that is actually a sustainability director who's embedded within the corporate leadership or a corporate green team. For smaller companies, they might not have anything formal, but just that, companies that really genuinely care about sustainability. Also, I tend to work with companies that already have like employees who are plant-based. They're already serving some plant-based foods. They're not starting from square one, although I do sometimes work with companies like that. they tend to need more help. But because this is a brand new initiative, we're really looking for those early adopters, and those tend to be the more forward-thinking companies that are willing to kind of take the lead. And then once we can show that this has been successful and all of these leaders in the field have done it, then we can go to the other, tech companies, finance companies, et cetera, and say, hey, look, you're falling behind. Like, this is now a best practice. Why aren't you guys serving plant-based defaults? But for now, because it's the early days, we're looking for those ones that are, a bit more forward thinking and really prioritize sustainability and also inclusivity. That's another part of this that we're talking about, which really hasn't been considered much till now, is that food is an important part of DEI, because a lot of people can't, if they're lactose intolerant, if they have religious restrictions, food allergies, they can't eat certain foods. One of our advisory board members is Hindu, and now she's vegan for ethical reasons. But she said growing up, she would go to events and like just have to have French fries and soda because there was nothing she can eat. And that's a very, alienating feeling, to not know that you can just sit down without stress and definitely be able to get a satisfying meal. And so we are also talking to companies that are really taking DEI very seriously and want to make sure that they can meet the needs of all of their employees, be it the growing number of vegetarians and vegans or people with religious restrictions or allergies or, whatever it might be. So that's another major motivator for companies to work with us.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I never thought of it like that. And like your example with your friend and going to a wedding and having to like sort of just eat, French fries. Like I think it's something that a lot of us overlook. And I think it just goes to show that it goes beyond just being, oh, vegan or vegetarian for environmental reasons, but like people have like other reasons that like are less flexible that restrict them from eating certain foods. So but yeah, that being said, out of all of these partnerships, what have been some of your most successful ones and ones you're most proud of?
Yeah, it's a great question. So unfortunately, I'm not really allowed to talk publicly about any of them yet. That's the downside of working with companies, is that, their legal team has to get involved for any sort of like public announcements of partnerships. But I can say that we're in the final stages of organizing a pilot with a major tech company in their cafeteria. So that is very exciting and very gratifying. And there's also been some really easy, like early victories. So I was giving a talk to another tech company, and after seeing the presentation, like before, they're not doing much food service right now because of COVID. Excuse me. But just after seeing our materials and getting like the basic idea, they changed the name on one of their dishes. It's like they're serving like ready-made meals. So they changed it from a vegetarian hummus wrap to a roasted red pepper avocado hummus wrap, and the sales automatically increase like right away. So it's nice that we've seen some just like immediate victories. And then we have a lot of other projects that are in the works right now that are going to be a big deal once they're finished, but we're still in the early stages.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So speaking of also like your some of the symposiums that you have been a part of, I listened to an episode of the Reducetarian where you were featured back in June, and just having a conversation about shifting diet to be more plant-based. So as a college student, and I'm sure many of the people watching this are also college students, what suggestions do you have for eating more sustainably? Like I think when you're in college specifically, like on a budget, when you're trying to make meals quickly, and you're mostly just cooking for yourself.
Sorry, had to get a drink of water.
No problem.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I think just starting where you are, like doing what's accessible to you, and just not like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I know for a lot of people, the thought of like going vegan or trying to buy all organic or all that, like it seems too overwhelming or it seems too expensive and time consuming. And so just starting like a little bit at a time, and looking at like where are you eating most of your food and what are some easy alternatives like based on what your diet already is. So like if you're going out to eat a lot, can you at least a couple times a week like order a veggie burrito instead of a beef burrito? Or can you like get falafel instead of lamb? Get tofu pad thai instead of chicken pad thai? Even just getting like cheese pizza instead of pepperoni pizza. Those little switches when we're going out to eat are really easy. For folks who are doing a lot of cooking at home, again, there's kind of one-to-one switches that you can make sometimes. So like beef, if you're making beef chili, make bean chili instead. Buying, almond milk or oat milk instead of cow milk, things where it's like you can just put this in in a recipe instead of that. I mean, those are the easiest switches to make. And then I think just slowly incorporating new foods and new recipes and new restaurants. I know, like I learned to cook really after college. I went vegan. I had never cooked before. Like my family got takeout most of the time, and so it was totally new to me, and it was scary, and it was definitely a process, but it was very rewarding. And now I'm pretty good cook. I mean, it's taken a long time of like learning what spices taste good together, and there's all these little things that you pick up slowly, but yeah, like, I think at first I would make spaghetti with like veggie beef crumbles and like veggies and marinara, and I would make like a tofu stir fry. And those were kind of my two like go-to meals that I knew how to cook, and I would pretty much just alternate those. And then, eventually I incorporated more and more recipes as I learned more techniques and discovered new foods. But yeah, just kind of be easy on yourself, and like any little bit that you can do is a good step.
Yeah, I think it's important that you say that these sort of small one-to-one changes make the biggest difference. I think a lot of the times when people think of like transforming to like an all vegan diet, they think it's going to be extremely financially taxing, which is like valid. But I think even your analogy of like just if you're ordering pizza instead of pepperoni one, just get a cheese one. Like that's something small, something that is not going to take out like money out of your budget or anything. So yeah, I think it's important that we recognize that it doesn't have to be some radical big change, but it's the small changes that count the most, I think. So
Totally.
it's
And I mean,
great.
hey, peanut butter and jelly is vegan and
Yeah.
it's a complete protein. So like all else fails, PB&J.
Exactly. I'm sure most of us have that in our dorms anyway. So
Yeah.
yeah. And so as you know, we work with the CFIE and we're always looking for new ways to bring sustainable food practices to campus. So being that we are a university, I know you said you can't go into details about who you've partnered with, but we were just wondering if you have partnered with any universities yet. And if so, what have they implemented in their dining halls? And if not, like, do you hope to? Like, what's the future for working with schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So my colleague Alana Braverman is the one who leads our university outreach, and she's had a lot of success. One of our early adopters was the Harvard Office for Sustainability. They really led the way in a plant-based default policy, and now there's a bunch of other schools that have. She's actually working on a research project right now with UCLA and Harvard on plant-based defaults for events, and so they've had a bunch of different campus events at those two schools, but also other universities as well. And they're doing a plant-based default, so people RSVP in advance, and there's just a box you check saying like, yes, I'm fine with a plant-based default, or like I want to request meat, and they're looking at how many people choose a plant-based option when it's the default, and also looking at people's attitudes and that sort of thing. So
Right.
that study is being conducted over the next few months. The results should be out later this year, and so that'll be really exciting. And then there's also, I mean, a lot of departments at many different universities across the country, and actually some internationally as well, have adopted this as a policy for their events. We have actually a member of our research board as a professor at the University of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and he's an economist, and the economics department is now vegan by default, and the entire university is now vegetarian by default. So
Wow.
there is a lot
Wow.
of exciting precedent for adopting this. And if anyone's interested, if you're like passionate about getting your department to pass a plant-based default policy, when food at events returns, I know it's a weird time right now with everything online, but you can still set a precedent, even if it's mostly symbolic right now. You can say, hey, when we do start serving food again, let's adopt this policy. Yeah, we would love to work to help anyone who's interested in that.
That's awesome. That's so super exciting. And sort of staying on that theme too of students being interested in sustainable food systems. I know there's probably a lot of graduating seniors, such as myself, that are watching our interview. So, what are some tips and any advice that you have for people that or students specifically that are trying to enter into the food industry? And then a little more specifically, do you guys at the Better Food Foundation have internship opportunities or entry level opportunities?
Yeah, it's actually perfect timing because we're about to post two different fellowship positions that
Oh,
year-long paid
nice.
fellowships. Yeah. One of them would be working with myself and my colleague Alana, doing this institutional outreach and helping with the research part of that. So doing like data analysis and reading studies. And then my colleague Laura leads our communications. And so the other fellowship position is a comms position. So like doing social media and more like writing articles and blog posts and things like that. So yeah, I'll maybe we can like publish our website and my email address. But yeah, if anyone's interested in that, we are taking applications very soon. And then generally speaking, in terms of opportunities, I mean, I really can't emphasize enough like how important connections are and networks. So I think just really get out there and mingle and meet people as much as you can. And just, through word of mouth, you learn about opportunities and you learn about other organizations that are doing exciting work. And I mean, that was really critical for me in starting the nonprofit. Was just like I was kind of already through volunteering, I was already immersed in this like whole network of activists. And so then once I wanted to start my own thing, I already had all these people to support me and say like, oh, hey, this other person wants to donate, or like this person would be a great, lawyer for you, or whatever it might be. Just like meeting people who are passionate about the same things that you're passionate about and really getting connected is, I think, the best way to figure out like what exactly you want to be doing, and also just to find the opportunities that there are in that field.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, especially as college students. There's such a heavy emphasis on like LinkedIn and things like that. And so just to like hear it being confirmed by someone like you, like, yes, that works. Like, yes, we should be doing that. It's really great and reassuring. And yeah,
Yeah, though, to clarify, I mean, I know it's harder nowadays, especially without in-person events, but I think not just like networking as in like adding, because some people will just like add everyone on LinkedIn who,
yeah.
does this field, but like really
Yeah.
building meaningful relationships with people.
Mhm.
So like, you can kind of tell when someone is like networking for the sake of networking and
Right,
like,
right,
what can I get out of this person versus like, oh,
right.
hey, you're passionate about the same thing I'm passionate about. Like, that's awesome. Maybe we can collaborate together. So like more
Yeah.
that kind of energy than just like, can you help me get a job? Can you
Yeah.
help me?
No, yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Katie. It was a pleasure speaking with you and learning more about the Better Food Foundation and all that you're passionate about. It really was a pleasure speaking with you, and was a really excited episode.
Yeah, thank you
And
both
yeah,
so
we
much
will
for
be.
having me. Oh, sorry. And I just wanted to give my email address. So it's Katie, Katie at betterfoodfoundation.org. And Greener by Default, if you want more information about that program, it's just www.greenerbydefault.com.